Welcome,
Rigster,
Big MC, and the Baker Boy himself.
What is it that we are meant to actually do?
The right thing is not always the easy thing. There is a starting over. There is a forgiveness you can receive.
You came up with a certain point here.
It's a whole nother topic.
I knew that I believed in God. I didn't know what God to believe in.
Welcome to the World Gone Mad.
And a very merry birthday to all the Mad Hatters out there from WGM Studios deep in the midst of chaos. It's the Next Generation podcast for the Next Generation. Welcome back to The World Gone Mad, the least listened to podcast on the internet. I'm your crazy white fat host, the Baker Boy himself. And here in the Mad Studios with us here this evening, I'm very, very glad and very excited to introduce a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Terry Ward, clear out from Nebraska, I think is where it is, right? That's where you are right now?
A little closer than that. I'm Ogden, Illinois.
Ogden. I know you drove like 3-4 hours. Days to
in
get
a canoe.
out here. And I know it's raining out there like cats and dogs, and I know you had to brave the weather and the deer and everything to get here.
But I did it for you, Tom.
And I am honored and privileged to have that kind of sacrifice from a man like yourself. As I know you're no stranger to sacrifices, as our Mad Hatters are going to find out here in a few seconds. I know you don't have a lot of time, T, so I'm going to dive right into it. Tell our Mad Hatters about your background, where you grew up. Take us from there.
Well, how I grew up was quite difficult as a child. When my mother was 3 months pregnant with me, my dad had passed away in a car accident. 6 months to the day later, I was born. Through that situation and him not having any life insurance and some things like that, my family grew up and as migrant workers. We traveled the country out west picking fruit and vegetables. I have an older brother and two older sisters, and through that time, my mom would leave for weeks on end looking for work and leave us four children to fend for ourselves quite often. And so through that circumstances, we sat around and we would live in tents. We'd live in labor camps out in near the orchards and near the fields that we worked in at different times.
Working in those camps and in the orchards and living out of a tent and just constantly on the move. How many different schools did you go to?
I went to 36 different schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, which really was a struggle getting an education during that time period. We'd be at a location for 2 weeks, and my mom would say, "Okay, we're leaving." I'd walk home from school, and we would load up, and we would go from there. Leave all of our school supplies behind and everything.
No saying goodbye to friends.
No saying goodbye to friends. Getting those lifelong connections were difficult back in those days.
So now I'm a pessimistic person by nature. I'm a recovering pessimist, and I go to group about once a week. To me, undergoing all that pressure and the constant moving and the camps and tents and stuff like that, as far as a home, I mean, we know what a house looks like. People build houses, but they do a lot in order to create a home life. I would think that would have a negative impact on, it certainly would on my life as far as perception, but how, if at all, did your environment growing up have an impact on your life?
Well, it had a very negative impact for a number of years. You grow up in that unstable of a home environment. The big buzzword in the last 10 years has been a dysfunctional family.
Oh, yeah.
My family was pretty dysfunctional when you didn't have a home, didn't have a roof over your head. Well, it left me in a situation where I was very resentful for a number of years. As a teenager, I was pretty resentful by the fact that I didn't have a dad, didn't have a father, didn't have any positive male role model in my life, and therefore it left me in a situation where I just didn't embrace that type of environment. If a male teacher or something like that tried to speak into my life, I really didn't embrace that at all. It wasn't until I was about 17 years old and I got invited to a church lock-in that the youth pastor was speaking and giving a message there, talking about how God is the father to the fatherless. And that resonated deep down in my soul. And when it did, it really brought me to a relationship with Christ right there on the spot. New Year's Eve of 1988. It would have been right around midnight, pretty close, heading into 1989. And during that time, shortly thereafter, it was a pretty eventful year for me. Shortly thereafter, I had a male role model that came into my life finally. A newspaper publisher in a small town in Oklahoma called me up and offered me a job as a part-time reporter while I was in high school. And he started mentoring me and teaching me along the way. And that really got me to a wonderful point in my life at that time.
So what aspects of your life growing up through childhood and then some through the teenage years and then maybe even into your early adulthood do you think that have perhaps shaped you into the person that you are today?
Well, one of the things is, it would be very easy for me to continue to look at the past and use that as a crutch in my life to say, hey, it doesn't matter, what's going on in my life. I can always fall back on that and say, hey, I grew up with a rough childhood, and use that as an excuse to get me out of jams in my own mind. But
not taking responsibility
for my own actions, because I can blame it on the past and what I grew up in, an environment that I was thrust into my life. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I learned from that is you can't do that. You can't live your life with a rearview mirror. You have to look to the future and look to what Christ can do in your life. And that's really what has moved me forward in leaps and bounds with my children, with my wife, with my entire family, is moving forward and looking to what Christ did for me and what he's continuing to do for me every day of my life.
Okay, now let me play the mad advocate, because of all the challenges that you've faced, any one of us could be sitting here and pointing a finger at you and saying, you know what, you should be face down in the gutter. You would have very well wound up in jail and in prison with your background, and then be saying, hey, you know what, it's not my fault. Look at how I grew up. Why are you not in jail?
Well, quite frankly, I probably could be in jail. When I was a teenager, there were things I did that, I think the statute of limitations is over now. But, you look at those things and it can happen to anybody. But I think the key difference is embracing what God is doing in my life. After, coming to Christ at that New Year's Eve lock-in, I've started a family in my life throughout all these years. I've been in the ministry. You and I worked in the ministry together almost 10 years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Well, as I look at that, God is really, taking me to the highs and he's taking me to the lows. There are times when he's put me on my knees and said, hey, this is what I'm molding you into and I want to work with you. And then there are those times when I feel like I'm invincible because of the strength that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And he's given me a positive outlook on life. You referred to yourself as the pessimist of the group, or the pessimist club. Yes. Well, one of the things that he's given me because of how I grew up is a positive outlook on life that says, you know what, there's a strong work ethic that I got as a child. There's a lot of things that came positive and life lessons that I learned as a child that I apply each and every day, because he used that as a chance to educate me, maybe in a real untraditional format, 36 different schools, but educated me on life lessons that not a lot of kids today face, but there are those who do, and they just need to look forward to where they're heading and not getting stuck where they're at.
Okay, there's a lot of Mad Hatters out there that are watching and listening to this program right now that have probably can identify with your background. The struggles that you've had will resonate, and deep down in their spirit. What are some words of wisdom that you would impart upon them and say, there's a brighter future because A, B, and C?
Well, throughout my life, Toby, I've had a lot of people who have spoken to my life, whether it was that first newspaper publisher, whether it was that youth pastor that brought me to Christ early on, whether it's people like you that I've worked with in the ministry or throughout my career. One of the things I would tell young people today is embrace those people. Embrace those connections that God has put into your life to speak words of wisdom to you. And draw upon those relationships because they're important. And then secondly, I would say, forget about the past. It doesn't matter. The past doesn't matter. The past will continue to haunt you all your life if you allow it to do so. But what you need to do is focus on the future and focus on the bright outcome of where God can take you and where God has you at this point in your life. It's the most important thing that he's done for me.